Hi everyone, this is Amy's playlist, second song in the series, and I'm super excited because this is a piece that I fell in love with early on in my rock journey, and well, big surprise, it's a German song. My first listen was one of the few times that I watched the music video clip at the same time as listening to the song in that very first listen. And if any of you have seen that video, you'll remember that I really enjoyed it, both musically and visually. You'll remember that I felt like it was both, the video clip was both appropriate as well as expressive, along with the music, adding to the story, shaping the story. But now here I am, over 2 years later. And as I have been asking myself what exactly it is that pulls me towards this piece, that draws me to this piece, even from the beginning, and I've thought about the various elements that I enjoy in this music, I have come back to realize that as much as I enjoyed that video clip in the first listen, I find it incredibly irrelevant at this point in my musical experience, and maybe I'll talk a bit about that today as I talk about why I enjoy this piece. The fact that at this point, that is how I feel. I've been looking back and trying to figure out where did I get to that point? And I guess it was from the beginning. As much as I enjoyed that video, I loved the music. The music is what struck me from the very beginning, and the music is what pulled me into it. And the longer I live with this piece, the more I prefer it, the more strongly I feel that I want just the audio. So why is that? And what is it about this piece that pulls me so deeply? First of all, I feel like if I were going to describe the style of this piece to somebody who had never heard it, I don't feel like it would make sense for me to call it a rock ballad. I don't. If I were going to try to sum it up, I would say that it is romantic in the classical sense of the word. And that encompasses so much for me as a classical musician. It says so much to me. So I would have to be speaking to a classical musician or somebody who loves classical music to really understand what I mean when I say it is a romantic piece of music. And I prefer to experience it on that deeper, more emotional level without the interference of some, I'm going to say, applied story to it. In other words, the reason I feel that the video is irrelevant is because it tells a story that, okay, it fits the music, but that doesn't mean that it tells us what the music is. And that's the best way I can think to describe it. In other words, the video goes well with the music works with the video, but the music is so much more than the video. And so why is it that I call it romantic in the classical sense? Well, let's look at the characteristics of romantic music, classic romantic music. First of all, it emphasizes emotions, individualism, imagination, and nature, a sort of reaction to the Enlightenment's focus on reason and order, which is the world of Mozart, let's say. But now we're in the world of Schumann, Schubert, Brahms, Mendelssohn, and beyond. That music found inspiration very often in the natural world. It often portrayed nature as a source of beauty, wonder, and often even took that natural inspiration, the nature inspiration, and treated it as a reflection of the human soul. So we have these two elements, the natural world and the human soul, which are really big inspirations and focuses for the Romantic era music. This music championed the power of feelings and personal experiences over the strict logic and societal norms that were idealized before. And I feel like this is exactly what Ohne Dich does, at least for me. It is this reverence and inspiration drawn from nature. It is also this deep dive into personal emotions and experiences. That is why I feel like the best description for it is as a romantic piece of music. I would feel perfectly comfortable saying that it's in the same vein as Schubert's Lieder. Like, just off the top of my head, there's the Du bist die Ruhe, which is this beautiful, inwardly focused Du bist die Ruhe, and it's so contained and so meditative and so sacred. And then something like, say, Haydn Roselein, da 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 da. The story of a boy who picks a rose and the rose pricks him, and it's a red rose. And it's again looking at nature and drawing human correlations and comparisons from the natural world. One is more playful, the other is incredibly sacred and inwardly focused. This Ohne Dich is maybe somewhere in the middle, maybe leaning a bit more strongly into the tragic side than either of those two particular pieces. Also, digging into a bit of the meaty strength of the human spirit as well as the grandeur and the incredible expanse of the natural world. So it's not a mere copy of something that has already been done, but it fits solidly in that genre, I would say. Now, musically, it communicates a scene, a natural world scene. If we listen to the opening, when we hear this opening, isn't it gorgeous? And the strings that open it, they convey this idea of broad expanse, looking out, a panoramic view of the natural world. But then, rather than staying there as a sort of movie score type sound, it delves deep into the emotional scape of it without actually creating a storyline, although preserving the soundscape and the vantage point. It's one of those pieces that the music itself doesn't strike me as, we could say, tearjerker or theatrical style, trying to pull something out of you or exaggerate something. But instead, it's deeply inward focused in the way that it manages to target what exists already within you. We could say the emotional gut, to the point that when we immerse ourselves in this music, it's so powerful that we begin to feel that deep hurts in the gut emotional feeling, which comes with deep emotional experiences, even though the music itself doesn't have a lot of great drama or melodrama happening in the music. Now, after we have this wonderful, evocative, natural world introduction in the music, the next thing that enters is Till's voice. And one of the things that I truly love about this piece is how he handles his voice at different points in the song to color and shape his tone for expressive purposes. And that also is a feature that we find in this same genre, the romantic Lieder genre in the classical music world. It is such an integral part of how to convey, express the piece of music. It really relies on the skill of the vocalist to bring that into our experience. Tone, coloring, shaping, expressing these emotions and portraying them in a way that we hear. And this is something that I think even in my first listen, I commented on how the way he handled his voice and his singing style was so reminiscent of this classical style. But that aside, because it's not the fact that it reminds me of classical that makes me love this. What makes me love this is the fact that it works so well and is so incredibly done in its own right. And the way this happens, we start with this broad, expansive intro. Imagine the strings, the orchestral strings here, because I'm just playing the harp. That sets the grand stage, and then when Till's voice enters, it turns us inward. And his baritone, his articulation, his tonal coloring, his pacing, it takes us from looking out at the world around us and turns us inward to look at the world within us, our own experiences, our yearnings, our loneliness, our loss. The sweeping orchestral strings give it this expansive panoramic overview. And so what happens is we have this natural world panoramic view, and we have this inward focused, emotional exploration of our own deep feelings. And they become layered together, or rather, I should say, wrapped within each other. It's like the emotional exploration that comes with the lyrics and the voice is enveloped in, wrapped in and through this natural world. They become so intertwined, and yet they are pulling us in different ways. It's setting our, we could say, a wrenching emotional experience in the context of such a vast loneliness and aloneness that we find out in the wilderness. It's so achingly beautiful. Now, something that's unique to me and probably some other people, but not necessarily to this piece itself, but to how I experience this piece. And I've mentioned it before, that I tend to experience foreign language songs differently than English language songs. And that it's an experience that I truly enjoy. I don't speak German. I know some of the vocabulary, and I've been exposed to various German dialects and from time to time, German language itself throughout my life. So I have some familiarity with it, but I do not speak the language. And I enjoy how I experience this linguistic part in this song, where I don't really understand or hear all the lyrics as a well-linked thought, as I hear something in English. But instead, it's this odd mix of experiencing the voice as more of an instrument and enjoying the poetic elements of the language, of the lyrics, in more of a non-verbal way, as a sort of extension of the music, rather than an understanding comprehension of everything that's being sung. And yet there are certain words and phrases which I do know that stick out along the way. And so it's this kind of, well, it fits the whole feeling of the piece, actually, because, as I said, it's our personal experience wrapped within the natural world. So I hear Ohne Dich, and I understand Ohne Dich. And then I hear Und auf, a bit later, Hinter dem Waldesrand, weh mir oh weh, und die Vogel singen nicht mehr, and a little bit later, kann ich nicht sein, lohne nicht, little bit later, Leben, which even as a non-German speaker, I can enjoy because I understand just enough. I can enjoy the shades of sort of double meaning, double entendre between Leben and Leben. And all of this washes together and becomes just a sort of part of the fabric of the musical experience for me. And I love that about it. That is something which I know is specific to me and my state of understanding in the language, but it is very much a part of how I experience this piece of music. And I feel like it fits. But as I go through all these different things and ask myself, is this what makes the song for me? In other words, what if it were sung by a different voice? Let's say a tenor or a female voice, or different style, maybe a more lilting folk style. What if it were accompanied with different instruments? Or what if the entire piece were played in a different style? Would I still be drawn to it? And I have tried my best to be as objective as possible in answering this question. And I come back with a resounding yes, I would. So then what is it that is at the core of my musical attraction to this piece? I have to confess, it's been a bit tricky for me to try to isolate it. But I've finally settled on the melody. Well, the melody and its marriage with the text, which is, when you think about it, in itself a nice realization of the message of the lyrics. Because, Ohne Dich, without you I cannot be. With you I am also alone. So thinking of the melody and the lyrics, without you I cannot be, but with you I am also alone. There's this dynamic there as well, but I am going to focus on the melody first, because to me that is the thing that if I try to unravel and dig down, I'm pretty certain it's the melody that makes this piece capable of being what it is. So let's look at a few of the features here. We have this sort of buoyancy. Well, actually, before we go to the melody, let's talk about the chords for a minute, because that's where the melody is built in. So I've played it. It is a simple 4-chord sequence repeated throughout the entire song. We have D minor. That is our key chord. We have A minor. That is our dominant, but it's a minor dominant. Then we have G. That is our major 4th. And then we have F. That is our major 3rd. Well, looking at this, we start to realize that, as much as a musician, from a music theoretical perspective, I'm always reluctant to say this piece is in D harmonic minor, D melodic minor, D natural minor. It gets tricky when we do that. But this is kind of the modal D minor, the Dorian mode, or we could say the natural D minor, because we don't have any of the accidentals, the sharps that would change any of the natural chords here. And I think that is a very good choice, because we have the sort of melancholy tonality, and the 5 doesn't pull too hard because it's minor. But then the major 4 and the major 3 balance it so well. 2 minors, 2 majors, and it keeps us from being too gloomy, too depressed. It also keeps it from being too bright and trite. And that is the context in which this melody is built. And so in that context of that harmonization, we have the first notes. Which are simply outlining the chords, but there is a non-harmony note. This note here is not part of the D minor chord. D minor? Notice how it kind of lifts us out of the chord before we fall into the next chord. Listen to what happens next. Again, there's a note that lifts us up before we fall into. But even here, this is our chord. This is up above the chord and falling down into the next chord. It's that sort of upper neighbor feature. And as you listen to this piece, it is such a core element of the melody. Most of what we have going on here is stepwise. Most. We have some leaps here and there. Most of them are not dramatic. But it starts with this kind of a lift there. Now listen what comes next. Back to the D minor. Lifting here. There's this lifting out of practically every chord. Every time we arrive on a chord, we lift out of it before we move to the next one. It gives it a very easy complexity. What do I mean by that? Well, if we stick with just the notes that belong to the chord, it starts sounding incredibly basic and simple, maybe more folksy. But if we were to place these notes right on the beat, when the chord arrives, it would be more complex. Maybe we could say a bit more towards the jazz chord complexity. It strikes a balance between the two by putting them in, inserting them not when the chord arrives, but after the chord arrives to sort of lift us out and carry us to the next one. It's a lovely feature of this melody and one that works so incredibly well to give it its particular energy. Now, another thing that is kind of a marriage of the lyrics and the melody is the way in which the syncopation works. We have a lot of these moments where we have a short long, where the short is on the beat, the long comes after the beat. Dum da dum da dum bum da da dum. Let's see, we could do simply Ohne Dich da dum ba dum Ohne Dich, and this sort of long, short, long, but sometimes it's short, long, short, long. And that syncopation also gives it a sort of rugged energy without being contrived, because it is part of the natural speech rhythm of the language. And I just mentioned ruggedness. That's another thing, that's another feature that I think is well placed within this piece. Again, it fits the natural setting, the sort of ruggedness of nature, but also this sort of ruggedness of the human spirit, this ability to endure and even be beautiful in the jagged edges of ourselves, or the places where our lives are not all smooth and peaceful. And there are two primary ways that I hear this being brought out in the music. One is in the syncopation and the few leaps that are a bit bigger. Bum ba da dum, that bum ba, it launches us rather strongly. Or a little bit later. Da 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 dum bum bum da dum bum da da dum bum bum. We drop down and back up. You hear that in the music a couple times, and it's just enough to give that sort of jagged mountain peak or canyon moment in the music. And then the other thing where it shows up is in the chorus, when suddenly we have the guitar come roaring in, Ohne Dich, and the voice digs in a bit stronger, but it's the guitar just roaring away, and the drums a little bit stronger, give that depth and that power that makes it stay strongly away from the sort of, shall we say, sentimental, soft side. It is emotional and passionate without being weak. And that is a nice balance. It's not always an easy balance to strike in a piece of music, especially when dealing with love. How do you deal with this? And love and loss and loneliness and all of these things. I think this music does a great job of that. And as I think about all these wonderful design elements in this simple sounding, singable tune, it's no wonder then to me that it sounds so good, that it attracts me so deeply. And if you start with that, and then you add in the instrumental coloring with the strings and the roaring guitar and the drum textures and rhythmic determination that adds to the piece, and then the solo voice, and then the vocal backing chorus, it all conspires to wrap us in solitude with ourselves, where we find ourselves yearning for some connection that we could say is perhaps lost, that we once had or hoped for but never obtained, that sort of deep gut level ache that hurts because we would never want to let it go. But still, we miss something, set in the realization that all around us is so beautiful that it's painful. And so I find myself again playing with words a bit, this time in English, and saying, it's beautiful pain and it's painful beauty. And that's what I love about this piece. That's some of what makes it an incredible piece of music. And also a bit of why it lives securely on my playlist. And as I said, it's a piece that could be attractive to me with so many different settings. Well, I kind of like the idea of making a cover of this piece. I haven't done so, but I have music sitting in front of me, so just as a sort of example, let's explore what it sounds like on the harp a little bit as a sort of harp Ohne Dich. It's a bit repetitive, and so I stopped it there, but it's enough to give you an idea of how it could sound, and it's just enough to make me want to maybe develop it a little bit further into a bona fide harp solo. So that is my exploration of why does this piece live on my playlist, and I love it.